As you know, this initiative is from the Brahma Foundation, T2 Telegraph, Taj Mahal, and the series is presented by Jash Sen. Ashwin Sanghi, who doesn't know him? Celebrity, Forbes Celebrity 100 list.
My editor is sitting in the last row, so be careful of your praise because she knows everything.
Well, so, besides which, you know all about his about what he's written. How should we put it? Mythology in a contemporary context. Well, there'll be more of it in the conversation. And of course, he's a style from the famous Sanghi family. I remember the Taj used to deal with him over the years. I remember as a young sales executive dealing with him, getting business from him. And in fact, he was telling me that he went to his father and डर के पूछा कि मैं author बनना चाहता हूँ, writer बनना चाहता हूँ. तो father ने बोला कि इसका मतलब है आप कुर्ता पजामा और झूला लेके घूमेंगे.
तो डर उस बात का नहीं था. डर था कि I would lose my inheritance.
So he continues to engage so that he doesn't lose his inheritance, and so he's that, and in fact he still loves his single malt and cigars. So the Taj is very thankful for that. And we have Jash Sen. She's an IIM graduate turned writer. So so that's about it from me, and so I leave Ashwin Sanghi in conversation with Jash Sen.
And welcome. I'm sure you're all as keen to get started as I am, because it's not every day that we have Ashwin Sanghi in Calcutta.
And it's not every day that I get interviewed by Yash. So, great.
Mutual appreciation done.
Absolutely.
We'll move on. Ashwin, I have read, I think, a fair number of your books, and with great relish. What I wanted to ask you, to begin with, some of us know the story, of course. We all know the story of how you got published and the struggle of it and the eventual success of it. But what I wanted to start with was where you found that first spark. You know, most people who take up writing, and I would say in this day and age, I would say take up writing in spite of the many challenges it poses. You do it because of something very early on in life, and there may have been a lull at some point and you may have found it again. So what was yours?
Yash, for me, honestly speaking, it ran counter to my culture. I mean, my mother's family, of course, was very literary in that sense. They loved reading. My father's family, on the other hand, was really a family of business people. So I think it would be difficult to find someone within the Sanghi family who had read a book, and I mean a book. So, you know, I mean, I still recall at age 11 or 12 being sent by my father, summer holiday, tum kya karoge? You will not be busy enough. Go to the office. I have told this so-and-so Munimji, he will teach you how to do accounts. Learn debit, credit. Okay. I would always carry my own book, paperback, whatever I happened to be reading at that time. So that Munimji was a Marwadi Munimji, he wore that kala topi. So he would say, Ashwin Babu, what are you doing? Wasting your time. focus on the bookkeeping rather than book reading. And he would say, even if you have to do reading, read a balance sheet rather than reading a book. So this is the culture. I'm just trying to sort of give you the context. But I think the ray of light in my life was really my grand uncle who lived in Kanpur. And he had a beautiful library. He had, I think, some 15 or 20,000 books in that library. And he was a poet himself. He was fluent in Urdu, Sanskrit, Persian, English, French, I think 5 or 6 languages. And he would send me a book every week to read. And at a younger age, what happens is you're more excited about getting the book, not necessarily about reading it. So it was, oh, I have now one more book which I can put on my shelf. And the old man, of course, was extremely wise. He was a businessman in his own right. So he realized that this fellow is not reading. So he said, okay, now the formula has slightly changed. Every week I'll send you a book. And the guy who brings you the book, you will give him a letter telling me what you read and whether you liked it or didn't like it. And if you liked it, why did you like it? And if you didn't like it, why did you not like it? So it was almost like a mini book review happening every week. And during his lifetime, now that I add up all the books that he gave me, it was more than 400. More than 400 books. So, and if I really think back to college or school or an MBA program, none of it was worth anything in comparison to that. And he was far ahead of his times in the sense that he sent me a wide variety of books, whether it was classics. It wasn't just Shakespeare and Dickens and Tolstoy. It was also stuff which he felt that, this is stuff that you must read. Autobiography of a yogi, I read at probably 13 or 14. I think he was very liberal in that sense. I remember receiving a copy of Lady Shannon's Lover from him.
How old were you then?
How old were you?
Probably maybe 16, 15 or 16. I remember those two books very vividly, Fanny Hill and Lady Chatterley's Lover. Both of those came around the same time. So what I'm trying to say is that it was incredible. He gave me a rare edition of Omar Khayyam, Edward Fitzgerald edition, which was I think 1950 or 51. So lovely stuff. And all of that is still very much there with me. I wouldn't part with it for the world. But that's really where it came from. That was the spark.
Yeah, they say that behind every person who eventually writes, somewhere there is a book-lined library.
Oh yeah.
So
absolutely.
You would have, in your childhood or in your formative years, been exposed to one, and you would have loved one, and it just kind of gets into your bloodstream from there.
Absolutely.
So, so your first book, The Rosabal Line, and then Chanakya's Chant, then on to the Krishna Key. I'm just kind of 2/3 through the Krishna Key, and I see a change in your writing style. But how would you say your writing style has evolved?
Well, I think partly when you're writing your first book, you don't have any standards to maintain. So you're like, I'm free, I can do what I want. So in fact, honestly speaking, I think The Rosabal Line is in fact my best book. Because I wasn't constrained. As you start becoming more known, there is an expectation about what you should be writing and what you should be conveying and how you should be conveying it. You set boundaries for yourself. But having said that, I would say that probably if I look at that first book of mine, The Rosabal Line, it was all over the place. It was just all over the place. A lot of people turned around and said, were you on drugs when you wrote that book? And I can see Preeta laughing away there because she's the poor sod who had to edit that book.
I loved it.
And it ran from 3000 BC all the way into the present day. I think now that I look back on it, I don't blame someone for thinking that Ashwin Sanghi was consuming some sort of mind-expanding substance when he wrote it. Today, I think my writing is much more, what should I say? Getting that writing well is one, of course, about telling a story. No matter what words you use, ultimately the story is paramount. But it's also about getting balance. And by balance, I'm meaning, for example, the balance between research and story. Often it's easy to do a lot of research and end up with some wonderful stuff which you want to put in there, and then you end up compromising the story. Or otherwise you have a terrific story, but there isn't enough research to back it up. That becomes a problem. I think another issue is balance between surprise and suspense. That's again something which writers don't really think about. But the way I look at it is that if there is an event going on and there is a president who's delivering a speech and he suddenly gets shot, assassinated, that's surprise. But on the other hand, in case he is there and you tell the reader that there is an assassin lurking somewhere and he hasn't got shot, then that's suspense. So how do you balance the two? How do you create enough surprise and suspense to want to turn the page? So all those are things which I don't think they come instinctively to you. They are things which you pick up along the way. There are a lot of people who talk about the fact that writing is an art. I don't think of it as an art. It's much more of a craft. And you learn the craft as you go along. So I still think that I'm work in progress. And of course, there are a bunch of critics who have told me to my face what sort of a writer I am. I remember one of the earliest reviews that appeared, a lady said, well, Ashwin Sanghi's book is nice, but it could have been a little shorter. It should have stopped on page 10.
Oh, I think it's something you got.
Yeah, it should have stopped on
page 8.
10.
Page 8.
So, I mean, that's fine, but I have also realized that, the relationship between a critic and an author is really pretty much the same as the dog and the lamppost. I mean, no matter what you do, the lamppost is going to get peed on at some point. So that's the nature of what goes on in the industry. So I have now stopped worrying about that. Instead, the focus is much more on, do I like what I'm writing? It's not about the words. It's about, would I love reading that story? And the best compliment I have had ever from someone is that, listen, I was up till 4 o'clock because I couldn't stop turning the pages. And that's the only thing that counts.
Yeah, I think any reader, even if there's one reader who ends up saying, I just couldn't stop reading your book, it's a tremendous feeling.
Exactly.
So I do completely agree with you on this thing that the critical faculty and the creative faculty cannot coexist. Because fundamentally, if you're looking at something to critique it, and anything really, and essentially you're putting it under some parameters, some guidelines which effectively are limitations. And creativity is a space of no limitation. And there may be rules to it, there may be structures to it, and it's like...
It's almost... But and in any case, I mean, I have always maintained that I am a McDonald's more than a Michelin star restaurant. So, I mean, at the end of the day, why would you try and do Michelin stars?
Yes, but...
McDonald's?
Yeah, but I'm interrupting you, but don't take him at face value, because a lot of popular writers, if the only judge of...
McDonald's?
Yeah, but I'm interrupting you, but don't take him at face value, because a lot of popular writers, if the only judge of whether a writer is classic or not is time, really. So we were just talking earlier, and I was talking about Jeffrey Archer, and I think both of us like Jeffrey Archer a fair bit. Jeffrey Archer, I think, frankly, he gets a bad rap. And he gets a bad rap, among other things, because of his overwhelming popularity as a writer. But if you go back and if you read today, and I reread Not a Penny More, Not a Penny Less after a long time, and I was telling Ashwin that to me it's a very, very smart retelling for Dumas fans of The Count of Monte Cristo. It really is a revenge story where you are, hard done by the world or by a group of people. And you go back and you extract exactly what the world is taking from you. It's the same concept. but done in his own inimitable style. And I just think he writes.
Copy from one, it's plagiarism. Copy from many, it's research.
Speaking of which, this is.
And of course, by the way, it was I think the inimitable Mark Twain who said.
The tumble bug and done.
He said that a classic is a book that people praise but no one reads. So I would much prefer to be read than ever become a classic.
Yeah, I think yes and no. I mean, today I think that mantle has been taken over by other terms. Some classics are still read. I mean, Three Musketeers.
Yeah.
And Bram Stoker's Dracula. In their day and age, God knows, people would have called, I don't know what they would have called them, paperbacks. They would not have been highbrow literary fiction at all, but they've stood the test of time.
Exactly.
And no one's read what Bram Stoker wrote next, or very few people have. But everybody's read Dracula, or at least seen somewhere, and we all know the story. So that is a classic. It stood the test of time. So I mean, 200 years down the line, Ashwin, we will know.
Hopefully I'll be there in another avatar to see it.
So coming to research, this is Ashwin's, this is the Krishna key, and this is the number of pages. I'm not even getting into the number of references he's got. Some 43 books and blogs and websites, 32 video and audio, 10 sources, all listed. So now, first of all, in popular fiction, in India at least, I don't see anybody A doing this, B making such a rigor out of it. So tell us why you do it. Tell us what makes you do it, how long it takes. Tell us about the process, but mostly why do you do it?
You see, the stuff that I write about is a grey zone. Yash, it's I've always believed that if you really look at the two worlds of believers and atheists, right? And I can't remember who was it who said that there is something inside every atheist which is itching to believe, and there is something in every believer which is itching to doubt. And my effort is to try and bring those two worlds a little closer. So for those who want to believe, maybe it will give them some doubt. And for those who want to disbelieve, maybe it will give them some faith. It's somewhere in that grey zone. I don't look at my book or my books as something to give you some great fountain of knowledge. It's a starting point. It might just pique your interest to the point where you want to read more or you want to research more. I know what happened to me when I started out with Rosabal. I was on a trip to Srinagar when I ended up seeing that particular tomb. And this tomb is a very interesting tomb because there are two bodies in that particular tomb. One of the bodies dates back to the 13th or 14th century, which is a Muslim saint, a Pir, Nasiruddin. And what is more interesting is that there is a second body beneath that first body. And of course, the land records of that tomb go back to 112 AD, which is again a tantalizing period because that means it was almost around the time of Christ. And the first body has a north-south burial, which is Islamic. But the second body is an east-west burial, which is a Jewish burial of that time. So I found that fascinating. And I remember because I got so fascinated, I ended up reading almost about 50 books on various subjects around it. And when I wrote the Rosabal line, it wasn't really about writing a book, it was about exploring that subject. So that's pretty much what I'm hoping for when someone reads, let's say, the Krishna Key or the Rosabal line, that maybe it may prompt you to go and pick up 4 more books on that subject, or it may prompt you to visit some of the websites that I visited.
That's your great uncle speaking through you.
Absolutely.
You're essentially doing that for any reader who's kind of interested. Yeah. So talking about reading around the subject, most people who advise any including writing will always say, never, for heaven's sake, read on that topic, because you will pick up someone else's voice, you will pick up someone else's information. That way lies plagiarism by and large. Or at least, if not plagiarism, getting influenced by someone else and therefore not giving your own voice the fair space it deserves. But read around it. So, you could be writing about Mughal history, but if it would probably help to learn a little bit about Hindustani classical music, for instance. So yeah, I'd just like you to comment on that.
For me, honestly, the sort of reading that I end up doing is not the sort of reading that would ever be able to sort of influence my voice. For example, currently the sort of reading that I've been doing in the last year or year and a half is, for example, books on physics. I'm not a science student, so I need to understand the fundamentals of physics. And then I need to take it one step further, and I need to understand how it translates into quantum physics. And then I need to understand as to how it translates into the human soul. Now, that is not something which in any way is going to influence my voice. It's very, very boring for most people. So I'm quite happy to actually read about the subject, on the subject, exactly close to the subject. Someone asked me, what is your great qualification to be a writer, a fiction writer? I said, when I was growing up as a kid, I was a very good liar. And really think about it, what we do is basically spin a yarn. We spin a tale. We tell lies. And the way I see it is, if you're going to really lie, then lie as close to the truth as possible, because it makes the story that much more believable. So how do I get close to the truth? I need to research it. That's where the research really comes in, to make the story believable.
But of course, by your own admission, sometimes it's just something that fascinates you to read about the story can emerge from this. It's a two-way process.
It's a two-way process,
can
absolutely.
Yeah. So, your book with James Patterson, tell us how it came about. This is after the first three were these big hits, and then suddenly there was this news one day saying, Ashwin Sanghi co-authoring with James Patterson. And we all sat up, but we really didn't know how it came about.
There's one part of me which thinks that I could be a killer. Actually, there's a part in each of us which thinks that there's a killer lurking in us. And come on, for heaven's sake, your best export from this city has been Indrani, for heaven's sake.
She's from Assam.
So the point I'm making is that when I looked at that story of Indrani the other day, and by the way, I had just finished the plot for another Patterson book. The first Patterson book, after that I finished the plot for a second Patterson. And that's the time, roughly around the time when that story emerged. And my wife asked me, she said, why are you looking so angry? And I said, if I had written this as a plot, my editor and my publisher would have turned around and said, this defies all logic. This story doesn't make sense. But there is a voyeur in all of us. And just look the way we are lapping up the news. So the point is that crime thrillers have done exceedingly well all over the West. In India, we are still lagging a little behind, maybe because of the fact that there's so much of this real world stuff out there that fictional crime thrillers really don't do that well. But currently what actually ends up selling on the bestseller lists is either mythology or romance or chick lit. But gradually now we seem to be gaining traction in terms of crime thrillers. So what happened really was that one of my very good friends who used to work with Random House got posted into London, and she was working in the same office as another lady who was representing James Patterson. And so when people ask me how did that come about, I like to say that it was a typical arranged marriage. These two ladies, like two old aunties, got together over lunchtime, and they said, you you have a guy who writes thrillers in India, and I have a guy who's like the biggest writer of thrillers in the US. Let's put them together and let's see what comes up. So they actually pretty much tied it up on their own, sitting right there in London. And it was the first time that I was going to be doing a pure crime thriller. I've done thrillers, but they are all in the space of history and mythology. So this was a crime thriller, and I had a lot of fun doing it. So that's what pretty much then sort of got me going, and I said, no, this is a genre that interests me, and over a period of time I'd like to alternate between pure and simple mythology and history and crime. And then the other part of it also is, I think, Yash, that I don't want to be boxed in. I don't want to be called, oh, he is the guy who writes mythological mysteries, because then that means that I can only do that. I think this latest book of mine, 13 Steps to Bloody Good Luck, was really a little bit of an effort to say, hey, listen, I can do that also. So I'm not just a cook. I can also cook Chinese, and I can also cook Italian and continental.
Yeah, I was going to come to that. I thought maybe that would have been your catalyst to say, let me try new things. Why should I just write this
Exactly.
one kind of writing? So coming to this book, actually, 13 Steps to Bloody Good Luck is a book that I enjoyed immensely.
Oh.
And I enjoyed it immensely because I opened this book with preconceived notions. I thought it would be about, numerology and your lucky day and your birth sign and Falanatikana. But it was actually really interesting because it's actually a very analytical book. What it does is, it looks at, if I may paraphrase you, luck as a factor of opportunity, as a factor of attitude, and the three ways in which there are many factors, and you could use attitude and opportunity to either raise, recognize, or respond. Yeah, and it's been kind of tabulated like that. So I love the mathy part of my brain. Just enjoyed this very much because for years I taught mathematics, and I just loved that. The other thing I absolutely loved it was that there were no crutches. There was no crutch saying, here is this magic wand for you. And essentially what it is it addresses our attitude, which is sometimes a problem. It also addresses our approach to opportunities and whether we respond to them adequately or not.
Yeah.
So,
for me, this book actually, the idea had come almost 10 years ago. It happened at the time when the whole world was busy rejecting me, including Preeta's company. And 47 rejections later, there was no publisher left that I could approach. So at that point of time, what happened was my father had a very, very close Punjabi friend. And this was a typical Punjabi friend. He loved his black label scotch, and not just black label, but Patiala pegs of black label. And he was sitting with my dad, and I said, Uncle Ji, nothing is happening. My whole life has come to a standstill. All the letters have gone out, all the manuscripts have gone out, and this is the end of my writing career. So he said, Beta, just remember that in life 99% is about good luck. So I told him, I was in a very argumentative mood. So I said, but what about that 1%? That 1% must be hard work, it must be talent, it must be perseverance, it must be time management. Kuch to hoga usme. So he lifts his glass. I'm lifting my chai, but anyway, it was almost as full with whiskey. And he lifts his glass and he says, that 1%? That 1% is known as bloody good luck. So it got me thinking. I said, what is bloody good luck? What is that 1% factor which makes some of us lucky? We keep looking at people around us and we say, oh, he's so lucky, she's so lucky. What makes them lucky? And So what I ended up doing actually is I have been always much more of a reader of non-fiction than fiction. And so I ended up reading tons and tons of stuff, biographies, autobiographies, and what have you. And I ended up having a huge scrapbook of little real-world examples. Because, simply conveying a theory is not interesting. But when it's in an example, because we love hearing stories. So I just figured that this would be a great way to be able to present those stories of people who actually did it, right? And then try and provide maybe a rationale that as to what was it that was behind them in terms of making it happen. So for example, we give things like, for example, perseverance, a very bad rap. But the truth is that a ton of people out there were terrible, terrible failures, but they just kept persevering. I'm convinced that there are a ton of writers out there who are brilliant writers, but they just gave up a little too soon. Either because they'd received too many rejections, or because the first book didn't necessarily work too well, they just gave up. If they had stayed the course, probably they would be bestsellers.
I was wondering, when you said you are a businessman and a writer,
yes,
would you consider yourself a better businessman than a writer, vice versa? Number one.
Question, huh?
Number two, like I'm a doctor,
yes,
and I only know how to write medical prescription. When my wife said, "How are you?" I said, "I'm
Are they
taking
readable? Are they readable prescriptions?
Well, good doctors like that. And the second question is that, given a choice, would you prefer to be a better businessman making money, or being a good writer making us happy?
Oh, but he's a good writer making a lot of money.
That is the ideal situation. It's what is known as the sweet spot, where you're a good writer and you're making money. But having said that, I think the reason I went into writing was because I was getting utterly bored of my work life. My work life was not giving me any sense of satisfaction. I have always been a creative person, but the problem is that very often when you try and apply your creative instincts to the world of business, it can be an expensive proposition. And it turned out to be an expensive proposition for my poor old father. So I bless the man for having put up with me for so many years. I think over a period of time, what I realized was that I needed something where the creative juices would always be flowing. And writing gave me that. Today, if you ask me that would you ever consider going back to the world of business? No. The answer is a loud, resounding no. It would be very much the world of writing. It may be writing, it could be something else in the creative world. So now, increasingly, I'm also finding that honestly, it's not about writing a book as much as it is about telling a story. And there are so many ways of telling a story. Right now, I'm sitting in front of you, I'm telling you a story. I could be writing a book, or I could be directing a movie, or I could be telling an illustrator as to how to put together the pictures in a comic book. I don't know, but I love telling stories. And that's pretty much what I want to do. I've never thought of myself as a writer, I've only thought of myself as a storyteller, and that's pretty much what I want to be doing. There used to be the old times when we would sit around in circles and there would be someone who was a very good storyteller, and he would be telling a story and no one wanted to get up. They wanted to hear that story. It was Alfred Hitchcock who said that the length of a movie is related to the endurance of a human bladder. Because at some point of time you need to get up in order to take a break. But there were stories which you didn't want to get up, even though you were desperate to go to the loo. That's the sort of stories that I want to tell. And so when I'm writing, I'm pretty much thinking, I don't have a computer in front of me, paper, pen, nothing. I think that there are 10 people around me in a circle, and I'm telling them a story, but I don't want them to get up in order to pee. Simple.
Yes. Gentleman here. Okay. After that.
I think there is part of it is randomness. Part of it is randomness. But even in randomness, there is patterns. So, for example, the way I like to think about it is that In fact, towards the end of this book, I have talked about 3 concepts where initially people used to talk about a person being very intelligent, so that it was equated with success, potential for success, that he is intelligent, so he is likely to be successful. And the way to measure the intelligence was IQ. So we looked at that. Then companies and organizations realized that, well, we can have a lot of people who have high IQ, but they can't even get along with their neighbor. So they can't work as a part of a team, they can't do anything. So therefore, those companies then started looking at EQ, or emotional quotient. And they said, well, if there is the sweet spot is where there's an overlap between IQ and EQ. In this book, I have introduced the concept of LQ, which is the luck quotient.
Okay.
That could there be possibility that those 2 factors by themselves may not explain enough, because there could be someone who has a great IQ, great EQ, but still doesn't make it. To my mind, my favorite definition of luck is, well, not favorite, but the best organized definition is the Roman philosopher Seneca, who said luck is simply a matter of preparation meeting opportunity. And I find that to a very great extent, most of us actually do have opportunities, but very often we are not being able to recognize it. So what I have attempted to really talk about is that how would you recognize it? Even if it was there in front of you, how would you recognize it? And then assuming that you recognized it, what would you do with it? That I don't believe. I believe opportunities presenting themselves are random.
Okay.
But whether you actually are able to act on it is not random. It's like a little bit like sort of saying that I have this wonderful Maserati car, but I'm driving it on the potholed roads of Bombay. So the environment is pretty much given to me. The road is given to me. But I do have this wonderfully sexy car. So there will be stretches where I can rev up, and there will be stretches where I need to be careful. And so I see luck more as an interplay between what is not controllable, which is the road, and what is controllable, which is the car.
Okay.
Actually, earlier which I had thought about, but this luck quotient,
Yeah.
LQ.
Yeah.
I have another theory which I use a lot as a corporate communicator, which is the PQ,
Okay.
the preen quotient. Now, don't you think you would need to also
Please educate me, because I don't know. about
well,
it.
we'll talk about it sometime, like, Sanghi and Patterson, and but I just wondered, because that also should come into play, the presentation
Yes.
quotient.
Uh,
In the luck.
I do. In fact, in this book, I talk about 13 key factors, which I think had sort of played a very important role in people becoming lucky. One of those is communication skills. Because you may have a great idea, but you may not be in a position to really communicate it. And so I would agree with your
LQ
point of view.
plus CQ.
Absolutely.
Another question was about the fact that you've been promoting Kindle.
Yes.
Isn't that going to play hell into your royalties? In the
Not
sense
really, not really. I must tell you, my own view is that actually we as authors end up making a lot more when a Kindle edition is sold, because there's actually no cost of production. So to that extent, even though the price is low, but that entire price is clear-cut profit margin. Whereas the moment you have a paperback, and we are living in a world where we need to be environmentally conscious. So over a period of time, in any case, we are going to start running out of paper. More importantly, even just the sheer convenience. So, for example, I do most of my reading on aircrafts. So it's impossible for me to lug around 20 or 30 books on an aircraft. And I'm one of those funny readers who will read 10 pages of a book and then switch to another book and read another 20 pages there and come back to another book. So it's just far easier for me to have all of that on a single device where I can go back and forth all the time. So, and I end up using the machine a lot more because I'm able to mark passages. I'm able to do text search, which is again vital, because very often I may not remember where a particular thing was. So I can text search it in order to find it.
So you would read more fiction?
All my
non-fiction
reading these days
Yes.
happens on a Kindle. I would say 90% of my reading, except for those books which aren't there on the Kindle.
Actually, I must share with everyone, when I first met Ashwin, it was 33 feet. Of course, had no idea because he's not a film star. So I didn't know he was Ashwin Sanghi until I finally asked this horrible question, and what do you do? And then, of course, when he told me, I just came around to him, gave him a big hug, and shook his hand, and we chatted. And after a while, he said, "May I go off now?" I said, "Why? What are you going to do? You want to sleep?" He said, "No, I'm going to write." So you, apart from researching, you also write on flights.
Oh yes,
Wow.
like for example, today in the morning, I was up at, my flight was at 8:15 from Bombay. And 2.5 hours on the flight. I think I must have taken a break for about maybe 10 or 15 minutes. Because that was actually my writing time. If I would have normally been up at 5 o'clock in order to start my writing. But I used that entire 2.5 hours. So a lot of my reading and writing happens pretty much on the fly.
And you can keep people away from you, prying people.
I don't, on flights I just use the iPod, so no one then bothers me.
Fabulous.
Great. Thank you very much. On that note,
Yes,
Yeah, it's close on 5:30. So for further questions, if you have them, perhaps over tea and chattery. Thank you very much for being here.
Pleasure
Thank you
being with
very
all
much.
of you. Thank you so much for being a delightful audience.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ashwin.
Smallest
It's a joy to have you.
Smallest audience you have
No, but Sandeep, I'm so glad you invited me. Thank you.
I enjoyed your talk.
Please welcome. Thank you.
Good job, Yash also.
You can take a copy and get the book signed by. Don't sit here.
Puneet?